see if like this sounds good.
Yeah.
Should I just read the first part just to see how that sounds?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Jacob.
And welcome back to the Trend Show. Tonight, we are joined by special guest Ismael head jurist of M&M Law Firm. How are you doing today, Ismael?
I'm doing good. How are you, Jacob?
I'm doing great. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and talk to us. On today's show, we will be talking about the case Ismael has done plenty of research on in the past 4 years, Miranda versus Arizona, dating back to 1966. I'm very excited to have you on.
I'm happy to be on.
So go ahead and tell us, what is this case about?
With pleasure. So the Miranda versus Arizona case is about a man by the name of Ernesto Miranda who was taken in custody for rape, kidnapping, and robbery by an Arizona police officer named Carol Cooley.
Why is this case such a big deal?
I'm glad you asked. So the Miranda versus Arizona case was a very big case because when Ernesto Miranda was taken in custody, Officer Carol Cooley, who took custody of him, technically violated his Fifth Amendment rights.
But what does the Fifth Amendment even protect?
Well, the Fifth Amendment protects a citizen's rights to due process and protects citizens from self-incrimination.
Would you please explain on what due process means? I don't know what that means.
Sure. Due process basically means nobody can be deprived of their life, liberty, or property without being through the court process first. Due process isn't as important in this case. The Miranda versus Arizona case mainly focuses on the protection of self-incrimination involved in the Fifth Amendment.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense. Do you have any more information about the case?
All right, so while Ernesto Miranda was taken into custody, he was questioned by officers for 2 hours. Before being questioned, Ernesto Miranda was never told his rights. This may not seem like a big deal, but Ernesto Miranda didn't have the money to afford a lawyer, and he didn't know that the state had to provide him under the Sixth Amendment because he couldn't afford one. So Ernesto Miranda answered the questions without the help of a lawyer telling him what he should and shouldn't say.
Oh, wow, that's wild. So you're pretty much saying Miranda wasn't even given much help to plead for himself?
Exactly. Anyways, since Miranda didn't have much help, he ended up pleading guilty and was admitted to 55 years in Arizona prison.
Wow, that's messed up.
Luckily for Miranda, he eventually got his state-provided attorney, which is Alvin Moore, after Miranda's original case. Ernesto Miranda pleaded guilty, and Alvin Moore, Miranda's attorney, ended up appealing the case, saying that Miranda's rights were violated by the police.
How'd the appeal go?
The court decided to look at the case based on one question. Does the Fifth Amendment's protection against self-incrimination extend to the police's interrogation of the suspect?
What does the Supreme Court think about this case? About the case?
The Supreme Court ended up saying someone can't be forced to be a witness against themselves. They said that the police must read the citizens' rights to them prior to being questioned, and that if they aren't read their rights, anything they heard in the interrogation cannot be used against them in a court of law.
Wow, that sounds awfully familiar.
Yeah, it comes from the 4 Miranda warnings an officer must tell citizens before beginning any questioning. It is commonly required today in normal traffic stops.
Do you by any chance know these 4 Miranda warnings?
Indeed I do. They go as follows. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney, and if you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided for you.
Oh, wow. I never knew any of those. So what ended up happening in the Miranda versus Arizona case?
The Supreme Court ended up retrialing the case without Ernesto Miranda's statement. Chief Justice Earl Warren said, prior to any questioning, the person must be warned that he has a right to remain silent, that any statement he does may be used as evidence against him, and that he has a right to the presence of an attorney either retained or appointed. But even after that, even after that, Miranda ended up convicted of the same crimes, of the same charges, and imprisoned up to 30 years this time.
Wow. So even without his testimony, Miranda ended up in prison?
Yes. Though Miranda was imprisoned, Ernesto Miranda ended up being released on parole in 1972, 5 years after his imprisonment. Then 4 years later, on January 32nd, on January 31st, 1976, Ernesto Miranda was murdered while on parole.
Wow. Did they ever catch the killer?
No, the killer, Ezequiel Moreno Perez, was charged but never caught after he fled to Mexico.
Wow. That was one interesting case. You
It's-
really know a lot about this case.
It's part of the job.
Thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.